It was the second week of June 2004. The kind of Tennessee summer that feels eternal, where heat shimmers off the asphalt and cicadas scream from every tree. 4 college friends loaded up a blue Chevy Impala with duffel bags and mixed CDs. They were headed to Nashville, then Memphis, then wherever the road took them. A last adventure together before graduation scattered them to different corners of the country. They never made it past the county line. For 21 years, their families lived in that special kind of hell reserved for those who don't get to bury their children, who don't get to know. For 21 years, their case files gathered dust while their parents aged with grief etched into their faces. For 21 years, someone walked free who should have been rotting behind bars. Then, on March 17, 2025, a truck driver named Lloyd Mercer pulled over on Highway 76 during a rainstorm. His GPS had failed, and he needed to check a paper map. That's when he spotted something metallic reflecting in the ravine below, something that would finally crack open a case that had haunted 3 counties for over 2 decades. This isn't just another missing person story. This is about 4 young lives with futures that never unfolded. About friendships forged in classroom halls and dormitory rooms, then violently severed in a single night. About a killer who thought time would bury his crimes. About families shattered beyond repair and the rural community that never stopped searching for answers. This is the story of what happened to the Westfield Four and how a simple wrong turn exposed a monster who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Every case we cover takes weeks of research and countless hours digging through police records to bring these forgotten stories back to light. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind these mysteries, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of this case haunts you the most. Now, let's get back to the case. They met their freshman year at Westfield State College in eastern Tennessee. 4 students from different backgrounds who found themselves assigned to adjacent dorm rooms in Oakwood Hall. By sophomore year, they were inseparable. Megan Donovan was the planner, 22, and graduating with honors in journalism. She'd already lined up an internship with a newspaper in Chicago. She drove that blue Impala, a graduation present from parents who'd saved for years to afford it. Tyler Jenkins was the group's heart. A psychology major with plans for grad school, he was known for his volunteer work at the campus crisis hotline. His sister would later tell reporters that Tyler never met a broken thing he didn't want to fix, whether it was a person or an old radio. Aisha Washington was the artist. 22, brilliant, with a portfolio of black and white photography that had already won 2 regional competitions. The memory card from her camera would become crucial evidence years later. She'd been accepted to a master's program in New York. And finally, David Chen. The oldest at 23, a transfer student studying environmental science with dreams of working in conservation. His journal, recovered years later, contained pressed wildflowers from every hiking trail they'd explored together. David was the navigator for their trip, mapping out scenic routes and hidden spots worth exploring. 4 bright futures violently cut short on a stretch of Tennessee highway. The trip had been Megan's idea. A 10-day journey through Tennessee's music cities before they all went their separate ways. They'd saved for months, picking up extra shifts at campus jobs and skipping expensive nights out. They left Westfield at 7:42 a.m. on June 12, 2004. We know the exact time because Aisha set up her camera on a tripod to capture their departure. The timestamp shows 4 smiling faces squinting into the morning sun. They look impossibly young in that photo. Impossibly alive. Their families each received calls that evening, check-ins to let them know they'd made it to their first planned stop at Raven Creek State Park. The calls were ordinary. Megan told her mother the weather was perfect. Tyler left a voicemail about a hawk they'd spotted. David texted about a detour they'd taken. Those casual communications would be the last time any of their families heard their voices. The next morning, none of the 4 answered their phones. At first, their parents weren't overly concerned. Reception in rural Tennessee was spotty, and the friends had mentioned camping. But by evening, when the silence stretched into its second day, worry began to gnaw. Megan's mother called the ranger station. Yes, the ranger confirmed. 4 college students in a blue Chevrolet had checked in yesterday afternoon. They'd paid for 2 nights at campsite 17. But the site was empty. No tent, no gear, no sign anyone had spent the night. That's when the first alarm bells started ringing. By June 14th, all 4 families had filed missing persons reports. Police found the first solid lead that same day, a gas station receipt in Megan's name from a town called Millerville, about 40 miles south of the state park. Security footage showed the 4 friends at 9:17 p.m. on the 12th. In the footage, they look relaxed, ordinary. They pull away from the station heading south on Route 76, the opposite direction from the state park where they'd supposedly set up camp. Why had they left their campsite? Where were they going? And why hadn't they told their families about the change in plans? What we know for certain is that it had started raining shortly after 10 p.m. that night. A summer thunderstorm, sudden and violent. Visibility dropped to near zero in some areas. A trucker reported seeing a blue sedan pulled to the shoulder around 10:30 p.m. near mile marker 118, hazard lights blinking in the downpour. He didn't stop, a decision he would later describe as the biggest regret of my life. By the time state troopers began searching that stretch of highway 2 days later, there was no sign of the Impala or its passengers. The 4 college friends had vanished into the Tennessee night. The initial search focused on a 60-mile radius around that last sighting. State police deployed helicopters, search teams with dogs combed the wooded areas. Divers checked every pond and creek where a car might have skidded off the road. Nothing. 5 days into the investigation, the first significant break came from an unexpected source. A tow truck driver came forward after seeing a news bulletin. He reported picking up a blue Chevy matching the description from a deserted service road about 3 miles east of Highway 76. According to his logs, he'd been called out at 6:15 a.m. on June 13th, the morning after the disappearance. The caller had identified himself as Michael Donovan, Megan's father's name, information a stranger wouldn't easily know unless he'd gone through the vehicle's registration. When police arrived at the tow yard, what they found turned the missing persons case into something far more sinister. The Impala's interior had been meticulously wiped down. No fingerprints. No personal items in the glove compartment. The luggage that should have filled the trunk was gone. Only Aisha's camera bag remained, tucked beneath the spare tire. Most disturbing of all, forensic technicians found traces of blood on the underside of the front passenger seat. Not enough to suggest a fatal injury, but enough to confirm that someone had been hurt and that someone had gone to great lengths to hide that fact. The Westfield Four were no longer just missing. They were now presumed victims of foul play. By the end of June 2004, the case had captured national attention. The FBI joined local authorities. Teams of investigators retraced the route between Raven Creek State Park and the service road where the Impala was found abandoned. The families established a reward fund that quickly grew to $100,000. They appeared on morning shows and true crime specials, holding up photos of their missing children, voices breaking as they pleaded for information. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the blood from the Impala confirmed it belonged to Tyler Jenkins. Combined with the wiped-down interior and missing belongings, it painted a picture of violence and deliberate cover-up. Almost nothing was left behind to identify a potential perpetrator, except for one call to a tow truck driver made from a burner phone that had been used exactly twice. The second call had been placed to a number in Parkerville, a small town about 30 miles away. That number belonged to a hunting cabin owned by a local man named Edward Garrett. When police visited the property in late July, they found it empty. Garrett, a 57-year-old former mechanic with no criminal record, seemed genuinely surprised by their questions. He'd been in Florida visiting his daughter since early June. Security footage confirmed his alibi. The cabin had been unoccupied for weeks, yet somehow someone had called that number from the same phone used to arrange the towing of Megan Donovan's car. It was a lead that made no sense at the time, a puzzle piece that wouldn't fit until decades later. By September 2004, the daily searches had dwindled. 4 lives placed on indefinite pause while their families waited for answers that wouldn't come for 21 years. The years that followed brought that special kind of torture reserved for families of the missing. the inability to mourn properly, to heal, to move forward. There were no bodies to bury, no definitive moment to mark the transition from searching to grieving. Just an endless aching limbo. The Donovans, the Jenkinses, the Washingtons, and the Chens found themselves bound together by the worst circumstance imaginable. They created a foundation in their children's names. They funded searches long after official efforts had ceased. They hired private investigators whose reports grew thinner each year. On the first anniversary, the school planted 4 oak trees near Oakwood Hall, where the friends had first met. A small plaque read, simply, "For the Westfield Four. May they find their way home." By the 10th anniversary in 2014, the case had acquired that particular patina that comes with time. Part tragedy, part cautionary tale. Remember, the Westfield Four became shorthand for the dangers lurking on dark highways, for the vulnerability of youth, for the fragility of even the most careful plans. The original investigators retired one by one. The gas station where the friends were last seen was demolished, replaced by a modern convenience store whose employees knew nothing of what had happened there. Westfield State College became Westfield State University. The world moved on, as it always does, even while 4 families remained trapped in the amber of June 12, 2004. But something strange happened as social media matured. Instead of fading entirely, the case found new life online. Amateur sleuths created forums dedicated to the disappearance. Podcasts re-examined the evidence. Each anniversary brought a fresh wave of interest, a new generation discovering the mystery of the Westfield Four. One of these was a podcast called Still Missing, which launched in 2020. The host, a former criminology student named Aisha Washington, spent an entire season on the Westfield Four. She tracked down former employees of the towing company that had retrieved the abandoned car. The original driver had died, but his dispatcher was still alive, a woman in her 70s who remembered something the official reports had missed. The caller, who'd identified himself as Michael Donovan, had a slight stutter that became more pronounced when he gave the callback number, a detail so small it hadn't warranted mention at the time. Warner took this information to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation in 2022. By then, advances in cell phone tracking technology made it possible to reanalyze the limited data available from the burner phone. The ping radius narrowed the origin of the tow truck call to a 3-mile area that included Edward Garrett's hunting cabin, the same cabin whose number had received that second mysterious call. It wasn't enough for a breakthrough, but it kept the case from disappearing completely into the backwaters of unsolved mysteries. It kept someone, somewhere, looking over their shoulder, wondering if their carefully buried secrets might someday surface. And as it turned out, they were right to worry. The real break in the case came from the most mundane of circumstances. On March 17, 2025, truck driver Lloyd Mercer was driving his usual route when a thunderstorm knocked out his GPS. He pulled onto the shoulder of Highway 76 near mile marker 112 to check his backup paper map. A flash of lightning illuminated something in the ravine below, something that didn't belong. A glint of metal, blue paint weathered but still visible. Curious, Mercer made his way down the steep embankment. What he found sent him scrambling back to call 911. Wedged between 2 large boulders, invisible from the road above except at very specific angles, was the rusted remains of a Chevrolet, the same type of car 4 college students had been driving when they vanished 21 years earlier. State police responded within the hour. By morning, forensic teams confirmed what Lloyd Mercer had suspected. They had finally found the real Chevy Impala belonging to Megan Donovan. But how was that possible? The car had been towed to a lot back in 2004. It had been examined by investigators, processed for evidence, and eventually released back to the Donovan family. Yet here was an identical vehicle, with a VIN number matching the original police reports, hidden in a ravine less than a mile from where a tow truck had supposedly picked it up 21 years ago. The implications were staggering. The car examined in 2004 had been a different vehicle altogether, a meticulous duplicate with cloned plates and forged documents. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create a false trail. As recovery teams extracted the vehicle from the ravine, they made the discovery everyone had dreaded but expected. Human remains, not one or two bodies, but four, still seatbelted into their positions, four friends who had never made it to Nashville or Memphis. The medical examiner would later determine that all four had died from injuries consistent with a high-speed impact, likely when the car left the road during the thunderstorm. A tragic accident, not the violent crime everyone had suspected for 2 decades. But if their deaths had been accidental, then who had gone to such elaborate lengths to create the illusion of foul play? Who had wiped down a duplicate car, planted blood evidence, made that call to the towing company? Who had maintained this deception for 21 years while 4 families lived in agonizing uncertainty? Inside the recovered Impala, investigators found camping equipment, maps marked with their planned route, and David Chen's journal sealed in a plastic bag in his backpack. The journal's final entry mentioned they'd decided to take a scenic route toward Memphis that Tyler had heard about from someone at the park. David described how they'd gotten lost after dark, how the rain had started suddenly, how they were trying to find their way back to the main highway when they stopped to ask for directions. They'd pulled into a property with a cabin and garage set back from the road. The owner had been helpful at first, offering to lead them back to the highway in his truck, but something about him had made David uneasy. "There's something off about this guy," he wrote. "Megan doesn't want to follow him. Says we should just try to find our own way back to 76. The entry ended abruptly. Forensic technicians managed to recover photos from Aisha's camera. The last photo taken showed a roadside sign for Garrett Properties with an arrow pointing down a gravel drive. Edward Garrett, the same man whose hunting cabin had been called from the burner phone used to arrange the towing of the fake Impala. But Edward Garrett had had a solid alibi back in 2004. He'd been in Florida with his daughter when the disappearance occurred. Further investigation revealed something investigators had missed the first time around. Edward Garrett had an older brother named Robert who occasionally stayed at the hunting cabin. Robert Garrett had no criminal record, but former co-workers described him as intense and mechanically gifted. He'd worked as an auto body specialist at a now-defunct repair shop in Parkerville, a repair shop that, according to county records, had received a blue Chevrolet Impala for cosmetic work just 2 months before the disappearance. The answer to the mystery came from the most unlikely of sources: Edward Garrett himself, now 78 years old and suffering from dementia in a nursing facility. During a moment of lucidity, when detectives showed him photos of the recovered vehicle and mentioned his brother's name, Edward began to cry. "Bobby always took care of me," he said. "Even when he did bad things, he was trying to protect me." Edward's medical records revealed a history of violent episodes during psychological breaks, incidents his family had kept private. His daughter confirmed that the Florida trip in June 2004 had been arranged suddenly after a particularly severe episode at the hunting cabin. And though Edward had indeed been in Florida when the friends disappeared, phone records showed multiple calls between his daughter's landline and Robert during those same days. The theory that emerged was both simple and horrifying. The 4 friends, lost in the storm, had stumbled upon Edward Garrett's property. Edward, in the midst of a psychological break, had interacted with them in some way, perhaps threateningly. After they left, Robert arrived to check on his brother, only to discover what had happened. When Robert drove down the highway looking for the friends, he came across the accident scene. The Impala in the ravine, invisible from the road unless you were specifically looking for it. 4 college students, dead on impact. Rather than reporting the accident, Robert Garrett created an elaborate misdirection, a false crime scene designed to send investigators looking for a kidnapper or killer who didn't exist, while the actual victims remained hidden in plain sight, less than a mile from where searches had concentrated. It was a plan so audacious, so meticulous in its execution, that it had succeeded for 21 years. Until Lloyd Mercer's GPS failed in a rainstorm, and he saw what thousands of passing vehicles had missed for over 2 decades. On April 3, 2025, state police located Robert Garrett at a small apartment in Knoxville where he'd been living under his mother's maiden name. Now 82, frail and suffering from chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, he offered no resistance when they placed him under arrest. His only words were, "I wondered when you'd finally come." The district attorney charged him with 4 counts of evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, filing false reports, and abuse of a corpse. The major charges carried potential sentences totaling over 60 years. Garrett pleaded guilty to all charges. His public defender cited his advanced age and deteriorating health, requesting home confinement rather than incarceration. The judge denied this request immediately. "You sentenced 4 families to 21 years of the cruelest kind of prison imaginable," he told Garrett. "You will serve whatever time remains to you in a cell, not in comfort." During his allocution, Garrett finally explained the full story. His brother Edward had been experiencing a psychological break that night. When the friends stopped to ask for directions, Edward became agitated, brandishing a shotgun and accusing them of trespassing. Terrified, the 4 had fled in their car. Robert arrived minutes later, part of the family's system for managing Edward's episodes. He found his brother in a state of extreme agitation. Concerned about both his brother's mental state and possible legal repercussions if the students reported the incident, Robert had driven after them. "I just wanted to apologize," he told the silent courtroom, "to explain about Eddie's condition, to make sure they weren't going to call the police." He described finding the accident scene, the Impala wedged between boulders. He'd confirmed all 4 were dead. In that moment, he made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Eddie would have been institutionalized if it came out that he'd threatened them right before they died. They would have blamed him for making them flee into the storm. Our family had protected him for years. I couldn't let it all fall apart. So he created the elaborate ruse, using the duplicate car he'd already been repairing, staging evidence to suggest a crime entirely different from the accident that had actually occurred. "I never meant for it to go on so long," he said, voice breaking. "I thought maybe a hunter or hiker would find them within a year or 2. I never imagined," but of course he had imagined. Every time the case appeared on the news, every anniversary vigil, every new search, he had chosen again and again for 21 years to remain silent while 4 families lived in torment. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Each family was given time to deliver impact statements. Their words filled the courtroom with 2 decades of anguish. Birthdays marked only with tears, holidays with empty chairs, retirement funds drained for private investigators, marriages strained to breaking. "We buried empty caskets," David Chen's father said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "We spoke eulogies over nothing. We visited graves where no one rested. All because you were too much of a coward to face the consequences of your actions." Tyler Jenkins' sister addressed Robert Garrett directly. "You didn't just hide their bodies. You stole our right to grieve properly. You forced us to live with questions that burned through our souls for 21 years. There is no sentence long enough to repay that debt." The judge sentenced Garrett to the maximum on all counts, to be served consecutively, effectively a life sentence for a man of his age and health. As bailiffs led him away, Carol Donovan called out a single question. "Was protecting your brother worth destroying our lives?" Garrett didn't turn or answer. Perhaps there was no answer that could have satisfied anyone in that room. 3 weeks after sentencing, Robert Garrett died in the prison infirmary of complications from pneumonia. He left behind a detailed confession and a map showing where he'd hidden evidence from the original crash site, including personal items he'd removed from the vehicle. Items the families had wondered about for years: Megan's favorite bracelet, Tyler's class ring, a necklace belonging to Aisha, David's treasured pocket watch. These small, precious things were finally returned to families who had aged out of young parenthood and into gray-haired grief. Too little, far too late, but something tangible to hold after decades of emptiness. On a clear day in June 2025, almost exactly 21 years after the disappearance, 4 caskets were laid to rest in Westfield Memorial Gardens. The funeral procession stretched for over a mile. Students, faculty, retired investigators, community members, and hundreds of others touched by a tragedy that had become part of the region's collective memory. For the families, the recovery and proper burial of their children brought a complicated mixture of relief and reopened grief. The pain was fresh again, but now had somewhere to settle. The questions that had haunted them for 2 decades had been answered. Their children had died quickly in a tragic accident, not at the hands of a predator. There was a strange mercy in that knowledge. "We lost them twice," Aisha's mother told reporters after the funeral. "Once when they disappeared, and again today as we finally lay them to rest. But between those two losses stretched 21 years of not knowing, and that was the cruelest part of all." The case changed protocols for highway searches in Tennessee and neighboring states. New guidelines required investigators to check ravines and embankments with drones and thermal imaging, even in areas that seemed inaccessible. The Westfield Protocol, as it came to be known, led to the discovery of 3 other long-missing vehicles in its first year of implementation. Lloyd Mercer donated the entire reward money to a scholarship fund established in the names of the 4 friends. Each year, 4 students at Westfield State University would receive tuition assistance, 1 in journalism, 1 in psychology, 1 in art, and 1 in environmental science. The town of Millerville erected a small marker near the highway where the Impala had left the road. Unlike most roadside memorials, this one bore a different message. Look closely. What is hidden may someday be found. It was both a tribute to 4 lives cut tragically short and a warning to those who might think their secrets are safe from discovery. Time, as Robert Garrett learned too late, does not erase all evidence. Justice, though delayed, can still find its way to the surface, rising like those glints of blue metal catching a trucker's flashlight on a rainy Tennessee night. For the families of the Westfield Four, that justice came too late to ease the hardest years of their grief. Too late to let them bury their children while they themselves still had decades of life ahead. Too late to prevent the collateral damage to marriages, careers, and mental health that such prolonged uncertainty inflicts. But it came. And in a case defined by absence, the absence of bodies, of answers, of closure, that final presence of truth mattered more than anyone could express. The blue Impala, extracted from its 21-year grave, now sits preserved in the Tennessee State Police Museum, behind a simple plaque that reads, "Never stop looking." It stands as a reminder to investigators, to families of the missing, and to everyone who passes through those doors, that what is hidden does not always remain so forever. That truth, however delayed, however painful, will eventually find its way into the light. Every case we cover takes weeks of research and countless hours digging through police records to bring these forgotten stories back to light. We do this because these lives matter and they deserve to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind these mysteries, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which part of this case haunts you the most. For more cold cases finally solved after decades, check out the links in the description below.